Welcome to those who are just joining. We are going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure we'll have a few more folks join the call as we go. So welcome everyone to this month's edition of NAC's Telehealth Office Hour. We're very pleased to have you for today's webinar. On behalf of the National Association of Community Health Centers, my name is Olivia Peterson, and I am a training and event program specialist supporting the Training and Technical Assistance Division here at NAC, and I will be your technical host today. I am pleased to bring you the session along with my colleague, Philip Stringfield, who is the Manager of Health Center Operations Training, also in the TTA division, and Philip will be getting us started in just a moment. But before we get started, I have just a few quick housekeeping items to review. First and foremost, please note this event is being recorded. We will share the recording with you all within the next week or two. We will be sending that out via email, so keep an eye out. And then if you're looking for the slides, we will also be sending the slides out by email directly after this event. So keep an eye out. That'll come from trainings@nac.org. And then if you have any technical issues today, feel free to send us a chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that. And you can always send us an email as well. You will be directed to a survey after the webinar. We really encourage you to fill that out as it informs our future events. So thank you in advance for your feedback. And then if you have questions or comments today, we definitely encourage you to share those. You can ask a question verbally if you would like. You'll just have to raise your hand so that we can call on you. You will notice that all lines were automatically muted when you joined today's call. And then we also have both the Q&A and the chat available to you. So please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We're always curious to hear where folks are joining from, but feel free to share your questions, comments there. And if you do have questions, please plug that into the Q&A tab, which you'll see on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We will be keeping an eye on the Q&A and have some time set aside for Q&A towards the end of the presentation. So definitely make sure you're sharing your questions and your feedback throughout the event. And with that, I am going to go ahead and turn things over to Philip to get us started for today. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Olivia, and good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and do our usual plug-in for the NAC EHR user groups, NAC-hosted EHR user groups that bring together PCAs, HCCNs, and health centers to discuss related issues, developments, and upgrades within their respective EHR systems. Each group is led by a committee consisting of PCA, HCCN, and health center leaders, and we're always looking for others to join in. So if you're interested or if you would like to get more information, you can email me. And I'll also be sure to drop in a link in the chat box as well that I'll direct you to where you can locate the user groups and sign up for them if you're interested. Go ahead over to the next slide. And we're going to go ahead and dive in with the rest of the time. We'll be talking cybersecurity best practices. So as you may know, there has been a rise in cyber-related crimes in the past year and a half that has caused a lot of concerns for many organizations. And we're joined today by Taylor Wells with Northwest Technologies Group, who will be reviewing some of the top cybersecurity best practices for small organizations. This is aimed at giving you practical ideas on how you can best protect your organizations and your patients' data. So I do, before we hand over to Taylor, I just want to go ahead and put in one last plug that as we go through these best practices and you have questions and concerns that come up, I want to remind you to check and see if your organization is a member of a health center controlled network or HCCN, because if so, these networks may have some cybersecurity resources and services available to assist you as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Taylor to get us started. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks, Olivia, and everyone at NACT, and everyone here. Pull up my presentation. Thanks everyone for having us. Really excited to dive into today's topic, really all around cybersecurity best practices and how can your organization ensure you're really doing what we like to say, everything within reason to make sure you don't have a security breach, number one, and then number two, make sure that if you do, you're able to mitigate the least amount of cost and ultimately able to move your organization forward in a positive direction. Brief introductions around myself and the organization NW Techs. We help Small, medium-sized organizations tackle IT problems. Cybersecurity being number one of them. My name is Taylor Wells. I'm the director of marketing, and I've been with the organization for about 5 years. We do a bunch of additional trainings for small organizations around technology, everything from Microsoft 365 to password management, hopefully ones that we can come back to NAC and do additional trainings on for everyone. But we also have some pre-recorded ones at our website, nwtex.com/webinars. Before we jump into the specific 15 best practices, I wanted to share this quote with you by the former director of the FBI, Robert Mueller, in 2012. Granted, this is almost a decade ago. And he says, "I'm convinced that there are only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that will be. And even they are converging to one category, companies that have been hacked and will be hacked again." So for most organizations, and we'll go into a few statistics here, kind of frame the problem and look at some of the trends that we see in that we've seen in the past couple of years, and also something that even obviously the FBI have been seeing for a while now, have been the fact that it's not just will you get hacked, it's when and at what time in the future will it happen. And that's something you've probably heard, but it's becoming more of a reality. It may not be that the cyber criminal is successful. Hopefully they're not. Hopefully you have your defenses up. But chances are, especially if you're in a healthcare organization, you have had some sort of cybersecurity attempted breach or successful breach. And we've seen everything from large hospital systems to small practitioners being breached. And there really is no specific industry that's not being targeted. And we'll even look here in a second at statistics of smaller organizations. If you have a couple hundred employees, or maybe just a couple locations, you're not even a large system, then even those companies are being targeted because ultimately, especially healthcare organizations, store so much sensitive data. So I think especially healthcare organizations want to talk about also defining what is the problem, and that's really PII. So PII is personal identifiable information. If you're in IT, then you know you've heard this term thrown around a lot, and it really defines any information that's either a full name, social security number, credit card information, driver's license, bank account information, passwords, email accounts, email addresses. So it encompasses a lot. It's a pretty big spectrum, and ultimately, it really encompasses almost every organization has PII, and then obviously healthcare providers have multiple of those, if not more than that, right? And so it really is. This is when you look at your risk factors in your organization, PII is the number one. There's a whole lot of other forms of cybersecurity risk to your organization, but the number one is losing ultimately your patient data, your client data, and any sensitive PII that you store internally that's related to your organization, like your employee data. So really PII is the number one. There's a bunch of other things we'll talk about in this presentation that you can avoid, things related to like phishing scams, right? That maybe not so much losing data, but more giving wire transfer fraud or gift card scam. There's all sorts of things that are not necessarily PII that are important that we'll talk about. But PII, when you think about your risk factors, PII is number one. And you should be looking at wherever the data lies, that's what you should be focused the most resources on protecting, in addition to everything else as well. So kind of wanted to frame that as we go into a couple of trends we're looking at here. In the past year, Microsoft has occurred or seen 10 years of innovation in a lot of their tools, and especially cloud-hosted applications. So a lot of enterprise companies, small businesses, all the way to enterprise organizations, government organizations are moving to the cloud. The pandemic has spurred this. Just globalization, innovation, the cost of cloud solutions has perpetuated this. So there's a lot of things that the industry, the whole world of technology has changed, right? Everything, and I'm sure for healthcare providers, everything from telehealth to using more cloud tools to things being virtual to having remote teams. A lot of our healthcare providers, the ones we've supported, maybe 50% of their workforce is now remote, right? A lot of their admin staff, a lot of their maybe not so much patient-facing employees, but a lot of their admin staff or their executive teams are now remote. And a lot of people can work remotely, even doctors and or practitioners. So a lot of innovation, which changed the game, right? There's different cyber risks now than there were 5 or 10 years ago. A couple other trends here as well is out of one in for small businesses, right? So this is small businesses, not even enterprise businesses, but 1 in every 323 emails is a malicious email. And so small organizations, small businesses are getting targeted. Average cost of a breach is $3.86 million as of 2020. 43% of cyber attacks target small organizations. So obviously big organizations are no brainer. Bringing down a Twitter, bringing down a Microsoft, bringing down a large organization is a no-brainer, and there's a lot of that going on, or at least a lot of attempts. But 50% of it's actually targeting small businesses as well, almost 50%. Almost 100% 98% of social attacks rely on social engineering. If you take anything out of this presentation and this information that we're sharing today, social engineering. If you can protect and enhance your social engineering trainings, protocols, systems, testing, we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. If you can do that, that has huge impacts to your overall cybersecurity. Couple stories. I just mentioned Twitter. Twitter got breached 2019 by a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old, essentially kids from Florida and the UK. What they did is they went around and called hundreds of Twitter employees pretending to be IT to get them to give up sensitive information, which then led to them breaching politicians, government officials, billionaires' accounts, which could have wreaked havoc. Thankfully, all they did was a Bitcoin scam, which was not a big deal. But ultimately, it's a 17-year-old kid and a 15-year-old kid out of Florida and the UK were able to breach a huge company due to just a socially engineered scam, right? It didn't take a whole lot of technology. So we're seeing phone scams on the rise. They've always been around, but more of it happening. Text messaging scams are on the rise. Email scams, you've seen those. So those 3 areas especially are obviously the most common areas of socially engineered attacks. If you can increase your training in those areas, huge. Number 6 is damage-related cybercrime is projected to hit 10 trillion by 2025. Crazy big number. Phishing increased in 2020 to account for 1 in 4,200 emails. So of every 4,200 emails sent in the entire world, 1 is a phishing email. And so that's crazy, right? And that's also something that we're seeing a ton of, and something you can do things about. You can actually put in systems to greatly reduce that. Nothing's 100%, but you as your organization, we'll talk a lot about culture. We'll talk a lot about putting different systems and tools and ultimately risks, controls, and things like that to ensure you have the best practices. But a lot of it is culture. A lot of it is creating a culture of awareness and training and people being transparent when things happen. I can't tell you how many times I get emails that are, somebody's account's been compromised, or a phishing scam, or somebody is being spoofed. Call those people. We'll talk a little bit about that later as well, as far as specific things you can do. But let's jump right into the first one here. And this is actually what we've been talking about already, which is the first kind of best practice you can do in your organization is provide, and ultimately the question is, does your organization provide regular cybersecurity training and testing for all your team members? So ultimately when it comes to, if 98% of breaches had some sort of social engineering element to it, then if you can put in cybersecurity training and testing, you can at least bring that number down, if not bring it down substantially. So what we do for our clients, we do internally is we have regular testing that just makes people aware. I mean, I can't tell you how many different types of scams out there that people should be aware of. Everything from gift card scams to wire transfer scams to phishing scams to, there's just all sorts of things, phone scams, texting scams, all these things out there that we all need to be aware, especially if you're in an industry that's either healthcare or in some sort of highly regulated industry. Not only do you have an obligation to your patients, to your employees, but also to the government to make sure you have this sort of training in place. But it's also just best practice, right? Like we talked about having a culture of people being aware of the risk, and understanding that it's so pervasive, and especially with amount. Just think about how much device proliferation has occurred in the past couple of years. Just look at your own device usage. How many more devices do you have now than you had 5 years ago? How many more devices do you have now than you had 10 years ago? So we have all these more risk factors, all these more points of opportunity for cyber criminals. So being trained on all those areas is super important. And then testing, regular testing of you and your staff, you and your entire organization, so you know which individuals may need extra coaching, extra training, extra awareness around potential risk. And that can also provide some great feedback for you if you're in a leadership position that you're making these technology decisions. And you're ultimately trying to make sure your organization has the best security in place. Number 2 is, do you have MFA enabled on all accounts? This is something that we still see a struggle for organizations of all size, where there's still sensitive information at online accounts. So MFA, multi-factor authentication, it's that annoying text messaging code you get from your bank or any online account. It's become much more pervasive and popular over the past couple of years. So you probably have it enabled. If you are a medium-sized company or enterprise organization, then you probably already have it enabled. And if you don't, this should be a high priority, because the studies show that you can increase on login security for an account by upwards of 60% by having MFA enabled. It's a study Google showed that all their email accounts, all their accounts that are MFA enabled, 60% increase in overall security. So that can bring just people ultimately getting inside your accounts. And since everything's cloud-based, this is now more important than ever. Tools like a password manager, single sign-on can help manage MFA, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, especially about password managers. But MFA is super important to have across your board. Passwords are actually less important. What is actually more important is password management, or changing your password. A lot of organizations, so 5 years ago, you probably changed your password every 90 days, right? Or at least that was the standard. That's becoming less important as organizations have more complex passwords, which is great. Have a super complex password, then have MFA on top of that, and you'll be in a great spot for your online accounts. And do that as much as possible. Do that for as many online accounts as possible. Even if they don't, do it for your Netflix account, do it for your Facebook account. Everything, especially highly complex, socially engineered attacks, ultimately have, they use multiple elements. So they might use, your Facebook account to ultimately get into your business email account, right? And so there's very complex systems. So making sure your kind of what we call digital hygiene, your overall hygiene for all of your online accounts and for all of your technology in general. If you can have MFA enabled, it's a great positive direction. Make sure that's there. Number 3 here is, do you have data encryption on all computers, servers, workstations, anywhere that has a hard drive and ultimately stores data? So this isn't so much of a problem for larger organizations, because usually they buy in large quantities of servers and or workstations and laptops and all that fun stuff. But if you're a smaller organization, you may have purchased equipment that doesn't have business class, business grade encryption built in. So if the laptop were to get stolen, people working from home, right? People are traveling with their workstations now more than ever, whether it's working from home, whether it's a hybrid environment where they're working some in the office, especially doctors or practitioners have that where they're needing to work from multiple locations, or they just have sensitive information on their laptop or their workstation. So ensure you have a data encryption built in. If it's not built in, you can also add it on top. So that's also something you can do as well. Number 4 is, do all of your employees in your organization use a corporate password manager? So this is where password managers is super important. Password manager is probably one of the coolest cybersecurity related tools and that you can have in your tool chest now more than ever. You can actually my wife and I were laughing the other day because I was probably laughing more than her because I'm more nerdy about tools than she is. But we said that my favorite tools, or our favorite tools, was a password manager, 1Password, and our budgeting tool. because both of those tools are so helpful for us, is keeping on track of everything, keeping things organized. We all have hundreds of different logins, and whether it's personal or professionally. So having a vault, a secure safe for all of that data is super important. So as an organization, but then also personally, I think Password Manager saves me personally 15 minutes a day at least, because I'm not having to reset passwords. I can store really complex passwords. I can have MFA built into it. I can store credit card information. If I need to purchase something, I don't need to go look for my wallet. I can have all that information there. So it's a super secure vault that ultimately allows you to be able to share sensitive information within your organization. So you have different vaults for different parts of the organization, but then you personally. Super important. 1Password is phenomenal. Probably our favorite tool that we've seen organizationally and for our clients, and I've used it personally. There's a couple other ones out there, but I think 1Password takes the cake as far as being the best. Number 5 is, does your organization have a written information security policy that all employees have to adhere to? So this is the written information security policy is one of at least 15 policies that your organization probably should have on file. That's really the blueprint. It's the architecture for how you manage your IT. So if you are the IT department, then in your IT manager, CIO, you probably have most of these, if not all of these, in place already. If you're a smaller organization, a lot of times we found that they struggle to have those in place. We've been able to help organizations get those in place. But ultimately, it does a couple things. First, it is a document that's really, it's the kind of the blueprint for how you manage your IT, like I mentioned. But it's also something that you talk about culture, that is something you can make aware to your staff, to your employees, to your organization, that here's the things that we find important when it comes to data security. So it should be in layman's terms. That way, ultimately, people can understand it. But then also, it should be it can be a blueprint for your employees, and then your vendors, and then also regulatory organizations, regulatory organizations, or organizations that want to work with you. Chances are, you know what I'm talking about. If you've ever had to fill out a security questionnaire, a security audit, they're going to ask for one of these. And really all 15 of these best practices are things that under HIPAA, under most government agencies or regulatory frameworks are going to require these things or highly recommend them. This one in particular is across the board required and we see across the board. Number 6 here is, are all your company emails and cloud storage regularly backed up? So chances are you've had probably on-premise infrastructure with servers. If you've moved to the cloud, all your data is in the cloud now, that's great. But are you backing it up? Do you have your own backup of it? If you're Microsoft, Google, AWS on Tuesday, was it Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday? They went down. And they had multiple outages, if you saw that. And so having a backup in the rare situation that happens, most of the cloud providers are pretty stable overall. But rare situations, you need a backup to get up back up and running. That's super helpful. But then also, if you were to accidentally delete something, user error, right? If you delete a file or an email, all the cloud providers guarantee that they're not going to lose your information on their end. They double and triple redundancy in place. But on your end, if your employee or team member or you accidentally delete a file or an email, they don't guarantee that. After a certain period of time, it's gone. That's why cloud backups are kind of the new standard for backups, especially if all your information lives in the cloud, which is great. If you're downloading stuff to workstations, that's kind of problematic, and you may want to back that up as well. If you still have servers in place for certain applications or programs, you still want to back those up. But if things are in the cloud, make sure you back up the cloud as well. Number 7 here is your organization running simulated phishing campaigns to raise awareness? So we talked about training at the very first point, right? Training and testing for you and your staff around cybersecurity trends and best practices and have that awareness in place. But do you have simulated phishing? So there's programs out there you can get. We do it internally and provide it for our clients, where you can actually get fake phishing emails. It seems like a double negative, but basically emails that appear to be a legitimate email, but it's actually a phishing email getting you to think before you click. And so, and also thinking before what are they asking you for, right? What's the next step? What type of information are they ultimately getting if you click on that link? And obviously, if you click on the link, nothing may happen, but you may actually download something, right? And that could be ransomware or malware. That's a big problem. Or it could be leading you to a website that could then ask you to enter information that then could then lead to a compromise of your organization. So phishing, like I mentioned, is probably one of the, and I just read a study earlier today by government officials saying that 90% of the breaches they're seeing had some sort of phishing element to it, which is a crazy high number. Even if it's 50%, that would be a worthy enough number to focus on. And so having training in place, just so you think before you click, right? Analyze who the sender is, analyze what they're asking for, analyze potential spelling errors or just things that seem, not appropriate for that provider. And then ultimately this simulated phishing campaign awareness, then you can claim, mark it as ultimately a fake phishing, and it will tell you if it's fake or not. Microsoft 365 and other providers are getting the ability to report phishing emails, which is super cool too. You can report those, and then let the rest of your team know if you get a phishing email. This helps so much though. And then it's also kind of gamifies this whole cybersecurity. The training as a whole, the testing and or training, cybersecurity training as a whole gamifies this whole process. But the simulated phishing really gamifies it, because then if you do click on it, the rest of your team can then see that, your score goes down. And it really provides a way to, once again, create a culture of people being aware of the problem, but then also being proactive with identifying the problem. Number 8 here is, are all your workstations and servers containing important information regularly backed up? So this is on top of kind of our point earlier around cloud backups. This is something you should still do if you still have data on those workstations or servers. You still want to back those up. Number 9 is, do all your computers in your organization have antivirus installed? This is a no-brainer, but still we come across organizations big and small that don't have a standardized antivirus that's up to date, regularly updated. And I emphasize that because that's a problem. You may have a version of something, but it hasn't been up to date in a couple of years. And so it's pretty much not good at all. So make sure it's installed across all of your workstations, and then also make sure it's up to date. Number 10 is, does your organization carry cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is also something that's becoming much more common over the past couple of years. And one way to look at how much security you should have in place, and it differs. So you should reach out. I'm not an insurance agent. Reach out to your insurance agent, whether it's usually general liability and comprehensive and liability insurance covers this. You should ultimately reach out to them and get a quote for your specific organization, because every organization is different. I will tell you though, all these things in this presentation, if you can do all these things, most likely you'll get a better premium and a better rate, because every year most cybersecurity insurance providers and insurance policies require some sort of audit, where they have you fill out a questionnaire identifying the things you have in place to make sure you don't have a security incident or a security breach, right? So if you can do all these things and then some, you'll be in a much better position to be able to lower your premiums and save money there, and then also get a great policy as well. But one thing to note, as far as a general rule of thumb, you should have about $150 per contact, a PII really, in your organization. And generally speaking, that's, for every client folder you have, you should have $150. So if you have 1,000 clients, you should have $150,000. And if you have, depending on your organization, it may be less or more, right? Because you might have multiple clients in a folder and multiple data points. So reach out to your insurance provider, reach out to your insurance broker to find out the right number you should have in place. That being said, I guarantee you, if you tell them you're doing all these things, tell them that you're you're vigilant to have the best practices in place, and you're having training and policies and procedures, and things are encrypted, things are backed up, you have the right IT resources dedicated to this, then you'll get a better premium and you'll get a better rate. But something you should have in place, because it's going to happen. It's not that you're going to get breached, but you're going to get an attack. So if you can reduce that chances of attack, awesome. That will keep your premiums low for insurance. That will keep your headache. That will keep your reputation, all the negatives of a breach, right? You'll avoid that, but then you'll also ultimately, save a lot of money on cybersecurity insurance and things like that by avoiding that and mitigating as much as possible. Number 11 here is, do you have an annual security risk assessment process in place? Another thing HIPAA requires, another thing that is best practice, is an annual audit, a self-audit of your cybersecurity best practices. This is something we help our clients with, and something that every organization should do, especially those that are under HIPAA or are hold a lot of sensitive information. This does two things. It's a self-audit. So every year you kind of self-audit yourself to realize the potential risk factors before they become lead to potential breach or incident. And then it's also an outward-facing document that if you were to get audited by HIPAA, or if you were to have a client or vendor ask you to fill out a questionnaire, the cybersecurity insurance being one of them, this will be something they'll ask if you have in place. Number 12 is, do you have a system to track security incidences? So this is a great portal, a portal that you should have in place where you're tracking training, tracking security incidences, having a culture of transparency around data security, super important, like we've talked about earlier, and having a portal where you can track these things from an IT standpoint, and know that, hey, if employees or people in your organization, if they experience something, right? If they accidentally give up information, if they accidentally click on that link, no one's perfect. So you need to make it aware to your team, to your entire organization, that we track these things, because, little side note story here, a lot of times cyber criminals, they'll attack one employee and try to get them to get information, reveal information. And then they'll go, if that employee doesn't work, they'll go to another employee. And so one side note is, you should never tell the cyber criminal that, hey, I'm not going to fall for your cyber crime. In fact, don't even respond to them. You should let the person know, if they're being spoofed, or if their account's been compromised, let them know, call them, let them know verbally that that's occurred. And then also let their IT team know, right? Let them know. That way they can let the rest of the team know that, hey, this is something you should look out for. And so having a way to track those things is super important, because it's not always just one employee. They don't try one employee and if that person doesn't let them in, they move on. No, they try multiple employees. Think about the story I said earlier about the Twitter incident. They tried hundreds of employees, right, before they got somebody. If one of those employees had made it aware to the entire rest of the organization that, hey, some suspicious activity was going on, do you think they maybe could have prevented that? Maybe, who knows? It could have definitely put them in a better spot though. Number 13 here is, are you sharing files securely? So if you have a good ERM, or if you're using your practice management tools, a lot of them have file sharing built in, right? Where there's a portal where your patients are logging in, or third parties are logging in to get information. That is best practice. You should never email things or send things via text or anything like that. It should have some sort of secure portal where your patients, your employees, really even internally, you should never send files internally or sensitive information over email. It should all be through some secure portal or secure channels, because email ultimately is not secure. One more note on that is, if you can send a secure email if it was encrypted, and there's tools you can add on to Microsoft 365 or Gmail to make things encrypted, but you can't guarantee the person on the other end is not going to turn around and send you an email. So once again, it's all about culture, right? It's creating awareness around, hey, we shouldn't send sensitive information via email. It should be through some secure portal. 14 here is, have you reviewed your specific industry data regulatory requirements? So if you're a healthcare provider, HIPAA is one of them, is probably the biggest one you should look at, and that will be pretty comprehensive. and I'll leave you at that one. And something we help our healthcare providers get through is HIPAA, or if you work with organizations that are HIPAA regulated, that's going to cover most of them. There is, if you are work with other government organizations, or if you have clients or vendors, they may have other requirements. Your cybersecurity insurance may have specific requirements as well. So those are all things to consider, but there are specific regulatory requirements you have to go through. Have you reviewed all those to make sure that you're in compliance? Number 15, are you alerted when suspicious activity occurs in your organization? So your IT department, internal or external, should be vigilant to have systems in place to be alerted. I'll give you a story. A couple months ago, one of our engineers reached out to me and said, "Hey, Taylor, I noticed somebody in Eastern Europe is trying to get access to your account. Do you know why that is?" And I said, "No, I don't know why that is." He was able to put additional security measures in place onto my Microsoft 365 environment. That way, that cyber criminal wasn't able to get in. So there's things you can do if you have the right kind of oversight views and things in place. Before we jump into the Q&A, because I know we got some questions, please submit questions. I'd love to answer any of these questions around these 15 areas. There's other areas too, but these are the main 15 ones. And these ones kind of ultimately trickle down into different areas, right? Because once you kind of go down into past policies, like I mentioned, there's 15 different policies. When you do an annual risk assessment, that's going to bring up different issues. When you analyze backups, that's going to bring up different issues. So they all have different spheres. This is a great roadmap and kind of an assessment that you can take your organization through. So take these 15 things with your IT department, your third party or internal. Or if you want to talk, you can feel free to reach out to us as well. We can definitely help you to walk through. Before we jump into Q&A, I do have a couple kind of bonus ideas or things you can do that are recent things that we've been exposed to and things that we're integrating or recommending or we've heard about been super successful. So number one is verbal confirmation. So a lot of things, for example, bank wire transfer fraud, right? When somebody does something like that, or purchasing, or those are probably the two main ones. Do a verbal confirmation. Call up the person to get verbal confirmation. This is a de facto two-factor authentication because it really acts as that second layer of confirmation. I think a lot of times because of technology and efficiencies, we want to do things remotely. I'm the first person that would avoid picking up the phone if I can to just send an email. But if it is something important, if it is something that potentially has some financial implications or may lead to access of data, right? Somebody's trying to get admin access. Someone's trying to get global admin access. Someone's just trying to you're ultimately giving either keys to the kingdom, right? Some sort of keys to your organization's data, or there's some sort of financial implications. Should both be a red flag whenever you get an email request and should have some sort of verbal confirmation on top of it. Another thing you should do is have unique signature, especially for internal communication. A lot of scams and things happen internally. We've noticed people, kind of one little side note is you can do like a unique signature. Some organizations, they never sign, they always sign, their initials. The person always signs their initials, or they always sign their full name or their full name and their initials. And there's things that you can do to kind of make it ultimately be more ultimately one more step that the cyber criminal has to go through to try to mimic you and or replicate a function that's in your organization. So let people, and another thing is let people know when they are compromised. So I can't tell you because I talk to a lot of people and I'm on, people email me. And so I get on people's list. I get probably daily, or at least a couple times a week, I get that their accounts have been compromised and they're emailing me to get me to download something or click on a link. And so I call those people. I've called dozens of people over the past couple of years and let them know. And that, hey, I think your account's been compromised. This is not, I don't know why you'd send me this invoice, or I don't know why you send me this link. And so let them know. And whether it's internal or external, let them know, give them a call. Don't send an email. I've sent emails before and gotten an automated response that was the cyber criminal that set up an automated response or was monitoring the email account and ensured that I got a response that was from the cyber criminal. Crazy levels of complexity that cyber criminals are doing. So having that extra layer or just letting people having a culture, once again, in your community, let your grandparents know, let your parents know, let your kids know that they should be careful, right? Because I almost fell for a mortgage scam, a couple months ago, just on a personal note, where it was somebody that was calling from my mortgage company. It said the mortgage company on the caller ID, and that a very sophisticated process that thankfully I kind of identified, or actually I called the mortgage company back and they had no record of it. So just be suspicious. Unfortunately, in this day and age, be suspicious and let people know. Be like, hey, that may have not. Why would that person send me that? And call them, let them know. Another thing here is categorize cybersecurity as an enterprise business risk. So once again, if you're leading an organization, you should categorize cybersecurity as a business risk. So it shouldn't be. Once again, this has been a lot of the theme in regards to culture and things like that we've talked about. But once looking at cybersecurity risk, looking at it as a business risk that affects every part of your organization. There's not one person in your organization that can't be unfortunately involved in a security incident. And so it really needs to be across your organization best practices. So hope this was super helpful. Love to jump into the Q&A now. I know we got a bunch of questions coming through, and please submit more questions. Actually I have one more extra bonus on top of a bonus. Pick a scenario and do a tabletop exercise. So this is something that you can do ongoing. So quarterly or semi-annually with your leadership team, with your IT department, your external IT department, pick a specific scenario, a possible common security risk for your type of organization, and play it out. And actually do a tabletop exercise where you actually plan it out. What would happen? How would you respond to it? What systems do you have in place to respond to it? A lot of the security big breaches that have occurred on the news, I always go research what actually happened, because we can learn from it, right? We can learn from ransomware. We can learn from socially engineered attacks. We can learn from vendor management attacks. We can learn from things like, breaches where somebody had a VPN account to their internal server that then led to this huge, E3 gaming company getting compromised. So there's all sorts of things we can learn from it, and do a table exercise. Actually play it out in your organization. What would happen? And do that on a regular basis. Do that, and you'll be kind of one step, and that will also bring to the surface, right? Areas of maybe we need to review our backup strategy again. Maybe we need to review our cybersecurity training. Maybe we need to review our password management. Maybe we need to review our IT vendor, right? If you have an MSP or a managed security provider, maybe we need to review them and look at a different provider if you're not confident that every aspect of that security breach or attempted breach would not be handled well. So happy to take some questions. I know we got some questions coming in. Back to you, Philip and Olivia.
Awesome. And just a big shout out and thanks to Taylor for that great presentation. A lot of great nuggets in there that applies to your organization and personally as well, because you are also able to make entry through your personal information in order to get to your business. So I think there was a lot of great information there that everyone can kind of really take point to and implement within their organization. And we did get a great deal of questions, so keep them coming in. And I also have a comment that I would like to get more information from one of our participants. So I'm going to get a couple of questions in, and then I'm going to unmute. So the first question that came in is what resource do you recommend for a phishing campaign, if any?
Great question. Yeah, I don't know any personal off-the-shelf retail ones that a business can purchase. We have one that we recommend and we implement for our clients. It's called Breach Secure Now, And I don't know if you can buy that as an organization. I think you have to go through a reseller like us. You could reach out to us though, and we could help you get that and help you implement that.
Awesome. And I think this is the question that I sent in ahead of time. It says, what risk are finance, aka covered under cyber insurance, and what costs always hit the covered entity if a breach occurs?
That's a great question, and that's something I'm gonna punt back to the insurance brokers again, because every policy is different. There are some policies, we actually have some insurance brokers that are clients and that we work with. And some can be like an umbrella coverage on top of your normal liability. That has pros and cons. So I would reach out to your insurance provider and find out the specifics of your insurance policy. That being said, there's some policies that can cover everything, right? That will cover, the mitigation cost of an IT and the forensic IT analysis that you'll need done, or the PR issues, or because kind of framing the problem, when you have a security incident, here's some of the areas you'll experience cost. PR will be one of them. Forensic analysis, you'll need like a specific IT resource to come in and do a forensic analysis. The mitigation costs based upon just getting your systems back up and running, depending on the type of breach it was or security incident. Each type of incident is different, right? If it's a bank wire transfer fraud, it's gonna be different than ransomware or malware or things like that. So there's all sorts of different types of breaches, but I would reach out to your insurance broker to figure out exactly what your policy covers. And they will give you exactly those numbers. And then that way you can analyze which areas have the most coverage and maybe want to increase them based upon your specific risk and based upon those kind of 15 things we talked about, right? If you have all these 15 things in place and then some, and you're doing at least the kind of the standard for best practices, then that will also impact your coverage. Based upon premiums, but then also based upon how much coverage you want, right? So I know it's a long-winded answer, but I would definitely reach out to your insurance broker and have them go through a couple options for you.
Perfect. Thanks again. And then so now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Roberto Casanova to kind of share some of his experiences with some of the software, because we're having a lot of good discussion here in the chat box just around different programs that are available. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get him unmuted to kind of really talk just about his experience with the program Sophos Intercept. So let's see if you're still there, Roland. Give me 1 second. Roberto. It looks like he just might have left the chat.
Philip, I think he's unmuted. Roberto,
okay, perfect.
Are you there?
You're all set. Yep, there you go.
He may not be. Roberto, if you're there, feel free to chime in.
Should we make him a panelist and see if it changes anything?
He is unmuted, so.
All right.
He might not be there, unfortunately. But Roberto, if you come back, just send us a note in the chat and we can come back to you.
Oh, perfect. It looks like he dropped off. He'll call back in again. So, so with that, we'll go to the next question until we get Roberto back. And then if there's anyone else that would like to speak to the software in the chat, feel free to raise your hand and we will unmute you then as well. And so there's another question that came in that says, what is a recommended best practice or multi-factor authentication solution for next-gen EHR? So we're looking for EHR systems. If that's something that Taylor can't answer, I will also do my best to pass this to our steering committee for the next-gen user group as well to see if there's any resources or information I can provide on that end. And it looks like Roberto's back on. Taylor, did you have anything you wanted to add before I?
For the single sign-on and multi-factor authentication for next gen, they probably have something built in. Depends if the next gen is is hosted locally or is in the cloud. Unclear if it's hosted locally or in the cloud, but I would reach out to them and ask them, hey, how can we get MFA or single sign-on enabled and get those additional security features in place?
Perfect. All right, so we're going to move to Roberto and want to see if we have him.
And Roberto, you should be able to unmute yourself now. We can't hear you, unfortunately. You'll have to make sure your audio is connected as well.
All right, let me just keep an eye out on the chat as we're going through, just to make sure there wasn't anything else. So it looks like no before as well was discussed as well. So if there's anyone else that would like to kind of speak to their experience with any of these platforms, feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and ask another question. It says, are there any recommendations for antivirus?
Great question. Yes, I would say WebRoot and Bitdefender are two great options that we use internally and we deploy for our clients. And those are two phenomenal options. Great question.
Perfect. Looks like there's CrowdStrike there as well. So I'm glad that everyone is at least able to kind of speak to their current experiences and what they're using. And feel free to just drop in the chat if it's been useful for you from a financial aspect, from an organizational aspect. And sorry we weren't able to get you, Roberto. If we're able to, while time permits, we'll make sure to definitely allow you to kind of share your experiences. All right, so we are down to the last question, and it is NAC going to be releasing more information about their breach incident last month. So if you are not aware, NAC did go through a system breach, and we are still getting everything together. But what I would like to do is a sharing of lessons learned from that, because there is no other better way for us to really be able to share that experience while also learning. So we're definitely going to make sure, as time permits, to do something that's going to be able to make impact, and then also kind of share the story of what happened, how we resolved it, and the lessons learned. So we'll definitely make sure to keep you all posted as that comes. And looks like we have a question. Hold on really quick. It's quite long, so I have to paste it. It says, could you provide some guidance in terms of what to do to combat a ransomware attack? I've noticed a rise in those overall as of late. Very informative session.
Yeah, that's a great question. What's really interesting about ransomware is actually pretty not socially engineered. It's actually pretty automated, and it's one of those things that's random in a lot of situations. Some attacks are very intentional, especially some of the larger profile attacks that we've seen on the news are really intentionally targeted, and they found kind of a very specific breach in the armor of the infrastructure, right? A very like small little in with the organization. So, but as far as ransomware in general, especially for medium to small organizations, it's pretty random. A lot of it occurs because of phishing. So if we're talking about combating it, I would say phishing is a big part of it. Also having an effective backup strategy, because I think what's the problem, what the problem is with ransomware is, especially in the past year, we probably have had a dozen notable breaches from a large organization or government organizations worldwide. And a lot of them, unfortunately, they actually paid the ransom and then they had the FBI go out, try to retrieve it back. And which is actually something the government has been saying you shouldn't be doing forever now. And I actually have talked to members of the Department of Homeland Security, and I've talked to other government officials that they constantly recommend don't pay the ransom. And the only way you're able to not pay the ransom is to actually have an effective backup strategy and ultimately the ability to get back up and running without having to pay the ransom. Obviously, losing data is a huge problem to begin with, right? And so if you do experience ransomware, no matter how you slice it or dice it, even if you have a backup, it's not good. But it can be a heck of a lot better if you have a great backup strategy. And then on the mitigation side, or excuse me, on the preventative side, definitely focusing on combating phishing scams, focusing on browser security and making sure people are aware when they're on a website that's not legitimate. And then phone scams and text message scams, because those things also really all the all the phishing types of situations where people are personating somebody else to get somebody to download something or to click on something or give up information. Those we're seeing as a huge trend for ransomware and ransomware being effective.
We got a good comment from Candace that said paying the ransom provides investment income to bad actors to improve their criminal enterprises and attack more people. Totally.
And I'm not obviously the CEO of any of the companies that we're operating, but generally speaking, we're in a predicament if we continue with that bad revolving door problem. And I couldn't agree more, Candace.
All right. And so with the last couple of minutes we have left, we're going to see if we can do the third time as a charm with Roberto and see if we can get him unmuted.
Hello.
Hello, Roberto. How's it going?
Good. I finally got this working.
There we go.
Anyway, thanks for the presentation. And I thought to myself, 15 best practices in an hour. I don't think it could be done. But Taylor, you did it, and you did it well too. Thank you for that. And anyway, Sophos Intercept X, we've been using it for several years at my organization. By the way, I'm the director of IT security at Urban Health Plan in the Bronx, New York. So we've been using it for several years. Before it was called Sophos Intercept X, it was just Sophos Antivirus Endpoint Protection. They have a pretty good suite of products. I won't get into that. I don't work for them. I don't get paid by them, by the way. But it is a great product and it is highly rated. And before we renewed our contract with them and repurchased their product, we did see a demo of the ransomware protection. And it's actually pretty cool. As soon as it detects some quick encryption of files, it will stop it. And it actually makes copies of the files so it can put them back, and it will stop the process from running and prevent it from running again. I've also seen it running live in my own environment. Several years ago, somebody probably clicked on a phishing email and got ransomware, and it didn't go any further than it started to encrypt a couple of files. So I'm pretty confident in its ability to protect against ransomware as well as other things. It's got a bunch of bells and whistles, and the latest version is cloud-based, so you can view what's going on from anywhere. So there's a lot of other good products. I just happen to think Sophos is the best fit for us.
Perfect, and thank you so much for.
And by the way, somebody mentioned it. KnowBe4, which we use, has a ransomware simulator program that you can use to test your endpoint protection against, see if the ransomware protection is actually working. So that's another good tool, and it's free. Anybody could download it and run it in their environment.
What was that last one, Roberto?
A KnowBe4 ransomware simulator.
Awesome. I saw there was other people in the chat talking about that as well. So thank you so much for Roberto for kind of closing us out and sharing your experience. I always think it's very a great thing to have health centers be able to really share their experiences from being boots on the ground and supporting other organizations as well in their roles. So want to go ahead and close us out. We're right at 3 o'clock. I want to go ahead and again thank Taylor Wells with Northwest Technologies Group, in addition to my colleague, Olivia Baggiano-Peterson, for assisting throughout today's webinar or office hour. Of course, we're going to be resuming next month, and we'll be setting us off with a policy update, a telehealth policy update from NAC's policy team, January 13th, same time from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. And we hope to have you there. So thanks again, everyone, for connecting and discussing with us, and enjoy the rest of your day, and happy holidays.